Swinburne University of Technology.
And I want to begin by thanking the traditional owners of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and the elders from other communities that may be here today. I'd like to recognise the continuing strength and resilience and capacity of Aboriginal people in this land. I want to pay special thanks to the Stegley family and to Kristen, who is here tonight, for their pioneering contribution to philanthropy in this country. I also want to acknowledge Trudy Wise, who was the last executive officer of the Stegley Foundation, who in my view is an unsung hero in the philanthropic sector and who has guided so many great projects, including the Australian Communities Foundation, over many years. I want to thank the Asia Pacific Centre for Social Investment and Philanthropy at Swinburne University, and John, Helen and Michael in particular for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I thank Jill Reichstein and the trustees of the Reichstein Foundation for the chance to work with them. Jill, recently described by the Australian Financial Review as a change agent provocateur, has contributed enormously to nurturing social change philanthropy in Australia. She's taken a punt on a rookie in employing me, so for all our sake, let's hope it works out. So with those thanks, I just want to get into the substance of tonight and say that both Lance Reichstein and Brian Stegley and Sheila Stegley were practical men and women with enough acumen to recognise that a significant source of their wealth derived from the people and processes of their enterprises. Lance built the toolmaking and machinery firm Industrial Engineering Limited into a major manufacturing business, employing 2,600 people at the height of its success. Brian was the brains behind Stegbar windows, frames and architectural solutions. Stegbar became an iconic brand symbolising domesticity and modernity during the 1960s. Growth in manufacturing and construction fuelled the wealth of both the Reichstein and Stegley families. Both were beneficiaries of the post-war reconstruction effort when a Keynesian view of the economy was ascendant. Competitive business inputs, cheap energy, cheap land and migrant labour, and a wall of tariffs and import restrictions underpinned the post-war economic boom.
This is wonderful for those who can hear us. Many can't. I wonder, could we move the podium forward? There appears to be no solution to the technical problem.
Okay.
Do you mind?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Let's start again. Ladies and gentlemen. Please feel free to come up front. That's the back. There are more seats.
So look, I was just, for those that couldn't hear at the back, I was just giving a bit of a preamble about the Reichstein and Stegley families and some of their common traits through business and the period through which they made their wealth. And both families accumulated wealth in the context of predictions and opportunities at the time in which they lived. Their philanthropy derived from an understanding that amidst abundance there was also poverty and deprivation in Australia. Brian and Lance were not born into wealth. They succeeded through entrepreneurial flair and a willingness to take risks in order to grow their businesses. They had no sense of entitlement or privilege. They both loved a punt, and a day at the races was pure pleasure. They both created terminating foundations, realised in the case of Stegley, while Reichstein is now a perpetual trust and very much still on foot. But essentially it was left to the next generation, to Jill, to Brian Jr., Sarah and Kristen, to fully develop a modern vision of philanthropy. This revolved around what we call social change philanthropy and a burning commitment to social justice and community empowerment. And it is why this lecture series remains important, because it's an opportunity to reflect on what we do, test ideas and think outside the norm. Social change philanthropy has 5 fundamental characteristics. It focuses less on ameliorating the symptoms of poverty than overcoming the causes of disadvantage and inequality. Secondly, it strives to include the people who are impacted by those injustices as decision makers. Third, it aims to make the field of philanthropy more accessible and more diverse. Fourth, in social change philanthropy, foundations are accountable, transparent and responsive to grantees in their grant making. And finally, donors and foundations act as allies to social justice movements by contributing not only monetary resources, but their time, knowledge, skills and access. Now, it's not a term that I feel completely comfortable with, implying as it does that other philanthropy is less ambitious or less focused on change. It derives from a view that some forms of wealth creation are part of the problem. Wealth created by the exploitation of workers or consumers, reckless misuse or destruction of the environment, and other questionable means contributes to human misery and entrenches inequality. Social change philanthropy embodies a belief that there can be a higher form of capitalism and better concern for humanity, one that needs to be aggressively promoted, one that facilitates the power of people affected by exploitation. Peter Buffett, the son of Warren, describes philanthropy as the, quote, charitable industrial complex, riffing Dwight Eisenhower's description of the military-industrial complex and the grip it had on American politics and budgets in the 1950s. Buffett says philanthropy is an elaborate means of keeping inequality in place. Quote, the rich sleep better at night while others get just enough to keep the pot from boiling over. Nearly every time someone feels better by doing good, on the other side of the world or street, someone else is further locked into a system that will not allow the true flourishing of his or her nature or the opportunity to live a joyful and fulfilled life. Unquote. And back in 1999, the cheeky Steve Berkman, former CEO of the Roundtree Charitable Trust, reflected that when money enters social relationships, it distorts them. He says that philanthropy for both rogues and the reputable is a surefire route to social respectability. It reminds me of the critique of the gift relationship described by Gareth Stedman Jones in his brilliant study Outcast London. In the late 19th century, the emergent middle classes in the centre of the empire used their wealth to shape the nature of social assistance, to maintain social discipline, and to codify class relationships. Giving signified wealth, power and position as much as compassion and generosity. Now, there is a mystique about wealth in Australia, about how it's acquired and how it's used. In a society built on egalitarian mythologies, we often don't want to acknowledge that inequality is at the core of our economic and social relations. And philanthropy both exposes and masks that myth. Greater transparency is essential to move philanthropy from a discretionary act of kindness to a social contract between the wealthy and the rest of society. A relationship that says you may accumulate wealth provided it is shared with all of us. Philanthropy can only act with moral force if the gift is transparent and seen to be so, that it is given freely and not in return for favours or to advance self-interest. The more we are open about the source of wealth, about the nature of giving, about our motives and purposes, the more we empower recipients. There has been a tendency to view the growth of philanthropy as an unqualified positive. As a sector, we are anxious to see the philanthropic dollar grow. We are focused on the amount of giving and why Australians, recently rated by Credit Suisse as amongst the wealthiest on earth, why we are not more generous on a structured, systemic basis. But the focus on the quantity of giving diverts us from the quality of giving. There is less emphasis on the process and consequences of the gift relationship than the munificence of the benefactor. Gina Anderson's recent in-depth study of a cross-section of private philanthropy is instructive. She found grant making is highly fragmented with less than optimal use of data to guide decisions and future direction. Secondly, few grants are made at sufficient scale to enable substantive breakthroughs in social change, new knowledge or research or advocacy. And finally, not-for-profits still experience a complex granting landscape that imposes costs for them and reduces the effectiveness for foundations. We don't have a robust giving typology that enables us to look at grants by their purpose, by whether they seek policy change, support advocacy, fund research, build organisational or governance capacity, and so on. We hope there is savvy giving, as Jen Timmins puts it, but we really don't know. It's clear, however, that many donors and foundations remain wary of advocacy and policy change as part of their core mission. Reputational issues, attracting media attention, the potential to be seen as partisan rather than independent, and the risk of failure are strong influences in Australian philanthropy, in contrast with much of the sector in the US. The Victorian Women's Trust has taken the Stegley playbook and is breaking the mould, giving overt credit to Julia Gillard and her reforms and her feminism, and supporting kitchen table conversations to re-engage people in politics and community. Any philanthropy that can attract 2,000 people to attend the Melbourne Town Hall on a Sunday afternoon is both savvy and highly effective. It's a level of cut-through that's reflected in the Stegley Foundation's Bend in the Road parable. And many people in this room will be familiar with this story, but it's an interesting framework within which to look at how we give and what the effectiveness of our giving is. It helped to guide the foundation, the Stegley Foundation, over its 30-year history. So it goes like this. Outside of town, there's a bend in the road where there are regular accidents and sometimes fatalities. The community comes up with a variety of solutions. You have $10,000 and want to assist. Do you help to provide services to the disabled, made disabled by the continuing accidents? Do you support the local welfare agency to assist needy families facing hardship as a result of the road accidents? Or do you give to the hospital for better casualty and ambulance facilities? Or the fourth option, do you support a local action group that wants to research the accidents, conduct a media campaign, commission a new road design, hold public meetings and put a case to government? In the parable, of course, the campaign gets up, the road is literally reformed, the action group then agitates for better welfare and other services in the community. If only all campaigns, fictional campaigns though they might be, were so successful. But this simple analytical frame helps us think through multiple dilemmas. For example, if growers in the Goulburn Valley are pulling out fruit trees, do we provide food parcels? Yeah. Do we fund training and reskilling to assist them to get into other jobs? Or do we work with farmers on new business models and markets to keep them in business? If prison growth is going through the roof and we are increasing spending on courts and prisons at a faster rate than schools and hospitals, do we run programs inside jails to rehabilitate more prisoners? Or fill the gaps in assisting ex-prisoners to transition back into the community? Or advocate for more crime prevention and justice reinvestment strategies to deter people getting on the criminal pathway in the first place? If asylum seekers are being refused their right to claim refuge in Australia, contrary to our international legal obligations, and oxygen is being sucked out of the debate, do we focus on material relief for those already here? Or support agencies in Indonesia and Malaysia to deter people from making the dangerous journey across the Indian Ocean? Or do we collectively support fresh thinking to undo the inhumanity of what is currently happening? It's like mitigating or adapting to climate change. These are really difficult choices. There's no one pathway to moral virtue, but there's a multitude of ways to be more effective and to have bang for buck. Social change philanthropy is now also about changing the nature of the market itself. It's reflected in a growing trend to convert core philanthropic financial assets, not just distributions, into forces for good. The short-term, highly speculative nature of listed equity markets is an engine of wealth, but it's also corrosive of long-term economic planning and thinking. Patient capital on the stock exchange is often in short supply. So innovations like impact investing are attractive. They have the potential to yield decent returns on capital and deliver lasting social and economic benefits. There is the possibility of forming a different marketplace, creating a pattern of investment that disrupts business as usual. However, when Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs announced new social finance bonds, 250 million in the case of Goldman Sachs, and a new Morgan Stanley Institute for Sustainable Investing with the aim of attracting $10 billion in client funds, you know that either something big is happening or that you should be very afraid. To be effective and to prevent perverse and unintended outcomes, clear principles and a public investing values framework needs to be put in place in the impact investing arena. The last thing we need is the development of creative funding instruments in social policy that have similar consequences to the derivatives and subprime financial ventures in the US, which have led to greater impoverishment, wasted capital, and loss of hope and confidence amongst both markets and communities. In reality, the funds management industry in Australia is currently poorly adapted for impact investing to build scale. The predominance of banks, other financial and property institutions and great mining houses in the ASX 100 reduces the incentive to look elsewhere to achieve at or above market performance. And for investors such as Philanthropies, there are few collective tools and measures to influence fund management behaviour. Environmental, social and governance screens, the ESG models, remain relatively passive, operating more as risk management tools rather than transformative devices. A major step forward would be for the Australian Government's $92 billion future fund to become a small but active impact investor. In effect, the Future Fund is Australia's sovereign wealth fund. It is a social investor seeking to meet unfunded superannuation liabilities to some public servants and defence personnel. Committing 1% of its investment capital to social finance or impact investing would revolutionise the growth of that market in Australia. This is only likely to occur if the guardians of the fund can be assured about impact investing as an asset class. Philanthropy can help nurture this new market formation. It can help to build the skills and undertake the strategic co-investments needed to reform the fund management industry in Australia. A first step would be to develop a certification system that helps the end investor to locate and assess impact investment products and services. And if we want to be active players in markets, we should also consider shareholder activism where appropriate, as another form of engagement to influence governance standards and social and environmental outcomes. We will have less effect if we act in isolation, but by working together we can have influence in calling out bad practice and questionable projects. Thanks, Jen. But government, through its legislative, regulatory, funding, tax and moral power, remains a key agent of change. The most immediate issue for our sector is the future of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission and the new definition of charity legislation. Both are major changes that rescue Australian philanthropy from the first Elizabethan age and bring it into, literally from the first Elizabethan age, and bring it into the 21st century. The Coalition has promised to repeal or unravel both pieces of legislation. The definition of charities legislation enshrines advancing the natural environment and promoting or protecting human rights as charitable purposes in their own right. This is a significant step forward. The legislation also means that we can now fund legitimate advocacy work with confidence. Philanthropy can even more actively promote informed policy debates and advance an even more civil society in this country. By any measure, the ACNC has made an impressive start. There's no logical or efficiency reason to throw the ACNC baby out with the bathwater. It's working well and has the capability and design right to help simplify the complex legal and regulatory landscape for philanthropy. We need to push back against those expressing anxieties about the possible misuse of information contained in the Public Register of Transparency. Brian Lucas, General Secretary of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, has said, "Many of the charities," and I quote, "many of the charities are concerned about the way in which a public portal runs the risk of misuse so that financial information that's provided could lead to certain conclusions that could be misused." It's not quite clear what he's referring to, but I can guess. There's no logical reason as to why religious organisations should be excluded from public scrutiny. They compete for public contracts. Their schools receive privileged funding without public interest milestones or tests. They are exempt from numerous classes of taxation. They are now highly dependent on public funds and should be subject to the same levels of accountability and transparency as everyone else in the not-for-profit sector. The government has made reduction of red tape one of its key benchmark measures. This is an opportunity to develop a new governance agenda that enshrines transparency, reduces compliance costs, and encourages more strategic philanthropy. All philanthropy comes at a cost to the public purse through tax write-offs and concessions. All Australians are underwriting the giving activities of the wealthy either through DGR, TCC, fringe benefit concessions, GST or other tax concessions and benefits. The public cost of DGR and other revenue foregone in the not-for-profit sector, so that's larger than philanthropy, is substantial. It's estimated to be over $4 billion in 2011-12. In my previous job, we would look at the cost over the forward estimates. That's $16 billion. It's a lot of money. Tax concessions for one group place a greater tax burden on others. Decision makers have choices, and a tax system with fewer concessions could help fund lower taxes for more Australians. Philanthropy must be able to demonstrate collective impact for these concessions to continue to attract public support. We have to be upfront about purposes, activities, guidelines and impact. There is now around an estimated 3,000 public and private ancillary funds for giving, holding about an estimated $3.1 billion in assets. The average PAF has about 2.2 million in its corpus and distributes around $170,000 annually. Some of this growth has come from a new desire by families and individuals to give, but some funds have also resulted from tax rules that enable the creation of a PAF to offset other tax liabilities. The relative lack of transparency about the operation and beneficiaries of private ancillary funds is unsustainable over the long term. There's no way that people sitting in Treasury and Finance are not going to want to look at what is happening to the concessions that are being provided through the PAF structure. It's been a very important tool for growing philanthropy, but it needs to be balanced. There is a risk that a large number of PAFs will be adrift, obliged by law to make distributions and guided by lawyers and accountants rather than solidly researched and informed advice. This needs to be a key area for Philanthropy Australia. The last 6 years, even with the Labor government in power, has seen the influence of the trade union movement and environmental organisations gradually superseded by the rise of business to the centre of power. Corporate interests are now moving from being stakeholders to the authors of policy. A maverick mining entrepreneur and billionaire could hold the effective balance of power in the Senate, and another has highly strategic stakes in key media companies. This drift in power and policy has largely gone unnoticed or unremarked. Already we have seen a series of decisions by the new government that begin to reweight the tax system and budget outlays to the advantage of those at the top of the income distribution. The issue for philanthropy will be the implications of this power shift for the people that we serve, the disadvantaged, the outcast, the disempowered. The new government will be trying to marry big spending commitments on paid parental leave, disability insurance and infrastructure with a view that the remit of our Commonwealth now extends too far. The Commission of Audit is a chance to make this marriage work, but it is likely to be only the first step into a debate about citizenship, civil society and public service that will unfold over the next 3 years. Australians have traditionally relied on government to fix enduring and episodic social problems. This reflects our collective instincts and a broad confidence in public solutions arising from the historically strong track record of Australian public services. A feature of the former Labor government was the further marketisation of services in vocational education, higher education, health and disability services, for example. Frequently, additional injections of public funding were conditional on further exposing these sectors to greater competition from private operators, resulting in greater consumer choice, but also greater uncertainty about quality, accountability and efficiency of provision. Despite spectacular recent failures in housing, finance and equity markets, policy elites still have faith in market solutions to the provision of services. Philanthropy is at the pointy end of where market forces, the role of government and social obligation meet. No doubt we will be asked to meet more of the service costs of government. But do we simply respond in an incremental way to agendas set by government? Or do we take the initiative and work with not-for-profit partners and their communities to identify no-go areas and those where, given the right conditions, co-investment could benefit people and communities? In responding, we need to be thoughtful and brave because we do have access to power, we have skills, and we have a duty to be a voice for the disadvantaged. We need a much more sophisticated conversation among ourselves about our role in civil society and where we can and should best intervene in social policy. We must put a coherent, rational and sectoral position to government. To help us form ideas and compare experiences, the Reichstein Foundation and partners will sponsor a visit to Australia next year by Julia Unwin, the distinguished CEO of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The Rowntree Foundation is a world leader in social change philanthropy, with a capital base in excess of £260 million and a current focus on tackling poverty, housing affordability and ageing with dignity. Julia's remit will be to discuss the development of civil society in the UK as austerity bites and begins to redefine the relationship between government and the rest of society. She will also bring a unique perspective on housing affordability, as the associated Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust has 2,500 units under management. Philanthropy sits above and outside partisan politics. We are a committed source of patient capital in a system prone to boom and bust. We have core resources that governments do not control. They can be tremendously important facilitators of reform and innovation. We can speak to the national and global interest, not for vested interests. As a result, we can and must speak truth to power, regardless of whoever is in office. We can be passionate without being party aligned, because the enduring issues Australia faces require bold solutions. Deep and persistent disadvantage, Indigenous disempowerment and poverty, a gender revolution that has stalled, climate change and the environmental sustainability of our cities and lands, access to decent transport, affordable housing and infrastructure, high quality education for all, not just the privileged. These issues will not go away. Indeed, they are more pressing than ever before. In the last decade in Australia, the richest 10% enjoyed almost 50% growth in their incomes. The richest 1% had 22% of the gains. This is not just unfair, it is counterproductive to growth and long-term prosperity. The reasons for this gap in inequality are within our control. They relate to the shape of our labour market, skill and education levels, and the concessions and loopholes in our tax and benefit systems, rather than mysterious, intractable forces of globalisation. And it's clear that philanthropy in Australia can only be effective in tackling these issues if we engage in greater collective effort, joint research, and more joint funding. Across government, industry, on the train and in the street, the central word and ideal is connectedness. This has to be our mantra in philanthropy as well. We work amazingly well together at the project level, identifying good people, ideas and organisations to jointly support. And Rankstone has many wonderful partners in this room. However, this tends to be opportunistic rather than strategic. We must take collaboration to another level in order to overcome duplication of effort, wasted resources, and to enable better informed risk-taking. We need clearinghouses for grant applicants in areas of vital social change, reducing red tape for not-for-profits while building grant making at scale. Proposals for a new centre of excellence built and led by the sector to leverage collaboration, knowledge, and to create an industry plan deserve strong support. Aside from getting our own house in order, it is obvious that we need to invest in lifting the quality and skills and advocacy focus of the key not-for-profits that we work with. There is an urgent need to raise the quality of the communications, media and advocacy efforts of Australia's change agents. Whether it's public transport, obesity, domestic violence or gambling reform, or almost any other issue that you care to nominate, there is a major resource gap in cash, networks and skills between change agents and vested interests. Philanthropy gets many requests to help close that gap. We can either assist on a case-by-case basis, or we could do something more strategic. For example, by seeding a new intermediary that could bring together the media and journalistic talent being shed by News and Fairfax and other outlets, and those marketing and branding gurus busting to do more than promote the latest Tim Tam variety. These could be brought together and they could be attracted to devote their hearts and heads to the issues that I've mentioned. This amazing talent could be matched with not-for-profits that have the grounded knowledge, policy smarts and track record to actually make a difference. Our media industry, so vital to our democracy, is in mortal strife. Hard copy newspaper sales are in freefall. Digital disruption is everywhere. The Canberra Press Gallery has shrunken by 1/3. And foot in the door and ear on the phone journalism is eroding public trust. The resources and independence of the ABC remain subject to government whim. The daily news agenda largely reflects Rupert Murdoch's personal and corporate dominance. Fairfax is on its knees. No major Australian media outlet today would run the compelling journalism which you can currently see every day in the Globe and Mail in Canada with its series on inequality. That series is called Our Time to Lead, and I strongly advise anybody in the room to have a look at it. It is brilliant journalism. Media diversity is crucial to the health of Australian democracy, something championed by entrepreneur and philanthropist Graham Wood. New digital players are important, but the main game has to be the survival of Fairfax and insistence on a truly independent, fearless ABC. Let's seriously consider Malcolm Turnbull's view that there is more to welcome than fear in direct philanthropic sponsorship or ownership of a free press. Now that would be game-changing impact investment. And let's regularly survey the health of Australian democracy and consciously prompt a debate about media policy reform. So, just some final remarks. For philanthropy to grow, we can exhort the wealthy to give back more of what they've accumulated and hope for the best. Or we can be more strategic. As Tony Windsor might say, we have to turn up. Our industry plan for the future should start from positioning philanthropy as a form of social contract, which means we must offer a value investment in making a difference at scale to the enduring problems facing this country. Unless we can do that, we will continue to rely on the act of kindness, which is fickle. It's not adequate. We will need to be much more transparent and much better at measuring our collective impact as a sector. If we continue with business as usual, Australian philanthropy will be confined to an interesting but ineffective backwater. We need new tools, pooled funds, stronger partnerships to transform our fund managers and to significantly strengthen the change agents that we work with. We must articulate where we fit in civil society, what our expectations of government are, and the black lines that we are likely to have as these relationships are redefined. Because we have no vested interest, we should regularly monitor the health of democracy in this country, and collectively we should actively investigate our role in ensuring that there is a strong, vibrant and diverse media into the future. And we have to be better at telling our story. We need to showcase what we do and how well we do it to national leaders. Philanthropy meets Parliament, it's an idea that I've been floating, is one way to do this, similar to the highly successful Science Meets Parliament annual dialogue, which has tangibly lifted the awareness and value of science amongst the nation's legislators. Now, this is a day and a half where the preeminent scientists and science institutions like CSIRO and others engage directly, put on forums, hold dinners, meet both legislators but also key public officials in the Commonwealth departments. In my time in Canberra, 4.5 years, it was the best experience ever. The place was abuzz with people talking about their field of research with energy and passion and engagement. And we have a great story to tell in philanthropy to our national leaders, and we need to be much better at it. As a sector, we should harness the lessons from Bruce Bonyhady's role in the development and advocacy of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We need to download that story and get it in front of every grant officer and every PAF and foundation trustee in the country. It's a great story. Can I finish by quoting Sarah Stegley, speaking to her philanthropic peers? Quote, "The philanthropic dollar will only truly work if it is strategic and goes to the heart of power. The status quo needs you right where you are. The status quo needs them right where they are. Change it. Change the status quo. It's not good enough just to attempt to make people feel more comfortable within it." Thanks.
This has been a Swinburne production.